Recently, schools worldwide have had to shut down to try and control the spread of disease. Now, because of this, there's been a boom in the desire to learn about online learning and, in particular, flipped classrooms. So, in this video, I'm going to talk to you about flipped classrooms, what they are, what they can be good for, who they're for, and what you need to get started. I'll also give you an example of one that I used, some tips for success, and some challenges that you're sure to face. A flipped classroom is a model of teaching where much of the learning is migrated to an online platform. The purpose of this is to free up class time so that you can do things like practice skills, engage in conversations with others, or do enrichment activities. Particularly good lessons or items to put online are things that require just rote learning or straight up definitions or formulaic work or things like that. The intention of this model is to allow students to come to class more prepared to learn because they've gone over some of the foundational concepts ahead of time, and thus in the class they're more prepared to talk about the subject at hand. It also is an attempt to use time more effectively in the class because students can then work in an environment where there's actual supports right at hand. If you take a look at a normal model where students learn in the class and then go home and do work, a lot of times when students go home, they don't understand what they're doing, or they may have forgotten, or there's misconceptions that need clearing up, but they're not in an environment where they can easily get help or find any supports, and so then they're just stuck until the next day. By going through and doing the learning the night before, then when the students come to class, then when they're practicing, they can clear up misconceptions immediately, and they're in an environment where there's a teacher and also other classmates at hand that can support their learning in an immediate sense. So what kind of class is this flipped classroom model best suited towards? Well, the answer to that is really any class at all. The reason why is because there's nothing saying that 100% of the lessons have to be put online, nor does it say anywhere that all of the learning has to be done solely online either. Teachers can decide what is best to be learned online and what's best to be learned in class, and they can put the online stuff online and keep the in-class stuff in class. To provide an example, there was a time when I once taught a grade 10 mathematics class where I used the flipped classroom model. Now in this class, what I would do is I'd assign a video for homework, and that video would be basically an instructional video covering the concepts that I wanted to cover for the next day. Students were instructed to watch the video and write down any questions they might have about the concept. Now, at the start of class the very next day, what we would do is we would have a quiz to benchmark their learning. Now, this quiz was a formative quiz, and it's meant to give the students an idea of how much they actually understand the concept that was taught. Then basically the rest of the remaining class was used to do the assignments and the worksheets that were associated with that assignment. And the purpose of this then is for students to practice and test their abilities and overcome any misconceptions they might have while in the class. At the end of the class, there was another quiz, and this one was a summative quiz, meant to establish how much the student actually learned. Doing this incentivized students to actually watch the videos and do their learning online at night as much as possible. Now, there are students who are not going to watch the videos, and those students can still do the learning in the class time, but students recognized that doing the pre-work and learning as much as you can online actually help to prepare you and prime you to be a better learner in the daytime during the class. And those students quickly realized that if you had done the pre-work, that you would be more successful during the class learning, and you would have more success during the summative evaluation at the end of the class. Now, very soon, students realized that the students who were watching the videos at night had an advantage, and that the videos were not onerous to watch. And it only took a short time for the majority of the class to realize that working in this way was actually advantageous for them, and so most of them came to adopt this practice. So what are you going to need to create your own flipped classroom? Well, what I would suggest is some form of screen recording software or a camera or both. And then after that, I would say A really good investment would be a good microphone if you didn't already have one, and then possibly even a writing tablet, although that's not really necessary either. For my own setup, I use a software called Camtasia, which I will link in the description. I sometimes use a software called OBS, which is free. Camtasia is not free. And then I also have just a regular webcam camera, and sometimes I use my DSLR camera as a camera as well. And these are all just resources that I have, but you don't necessarily have to have all of those things either. One thing is that a really good microphone is an advantage because it helps you have clarity of your voice, and it doesn't make the watching of the video painful for your audience. Lastly, I use a Wacom Bamboo writing tablet when I'm doing diagrams or mathematical equations because it helps the look of it to be more natural. This isn't really necessary, and in fact there's many popular channels where someone just uses like a sheet of paper and they have a camera over top of it and they just write on the piece of paper and follow along in that way. So what are some of the challenges that you're probably going to face when you're making your flipped classroom? The first one is time. Now, building online resources takes time, but it's important to remember that this is a one-time cost. Once it's been created, then you don't have to make it again. Now, for my own channel, it took about maybe 30 minutes to an hour for each video. And that seems like a lot, especially like, for instance, in my Mathematics 10 class, there's about 50 videos. So that's about 50 hours of work. But the advantage of this is that once they're created, they don't need to be remade. And there are some other advantages, like for instance, if you get a substitute teacher in, you can just direct them to the video and you don't have to worry about a sub teaching something in the wrong way or not knowing how to teach. Another major challenge that you are likely to face is establishing the initial student buy-in to this type of teaching. They won't be used to it, and so they'll feel like it's kind of weird or awkward for them to do their learning in this way. Now, there's going to be at least a small segment of students who do not do their online learning at home and come to class unprepared. Those students will expect the teacher to teach the materials that they should have learned the night before. Now, it's important not to give in to this temptation and reteach the lesson, because if you do this, then every student will just not do the online learning, and then they'll expect you to do that to reteach the materials the next day. So what you have to do is build it into the culture of your class that there's an expectation that you will do this learning the night before. And if a student comes to class unprepared, where they have not done the learning, then what you need to do is direct them to either use their phone or maybe an online resource in the classroom to rewatch the video then. And then that way you can still spend your time with the students who have done the online learning and provide the support that they need, while the other students who are now in a deficit can bring up that deficit and do the work that they did before. Now, leaving students like that will force them to realize that they actually should do the learning at home the night before. And at first it's a little bit tough because as teachers, we really care about the learning of our students. It's not really in our nature to kind of leave them to twist in the wind like that. But in some ways, you have to get that buy-in, and students won't get it unless you do that to them. So another thing is we have to quickly identify which students don't have access to technology. So students may not tell you right away. It's important to be explicit in asking. Now, if a student doesn't have internet at home, what we can do is you can actually put all your videos, for instance, on a memory stick, and then they could just watch the videos, or you can just put it on like a portable hard drive or something like that to give the students the access. Failing that, if a student just absolutely does not have any access to technology, so let's say for some reason their family does not even have a computer, then it will be important for you to actually provide a computer for them, right? Or if that is impossible, then that's when it's appropriate to spend some class time teaching that student. Another challenge that you will likely face is in your own lack of experience and expertise in making videos. Most people have not made a lot of videos. Now, it's important to remember that it's not really the production quality that's important. What's really important is the actual content of the video. So don't hold yourself to too high of a standard. Don't get down on yourself if you're not the next Steven Spielberg making these instructional videos. The other thing is also make sure you realize that there are online communities of learning around making videos. There's also probably local people in your own school who have expertise using some of the software, and you can definitely tap into those people. Now, if those people are not willing to help you or you don't really feel comfortable, there are a ton of online resources that can help you to learn how to use different pieces of software or to access different resources like free music or other things like that. Finally, the last thing is the intellectual property. Now, it's important for you to understand that if you make these videos using your school's resources and on your school's preparation time, that those videos do belong to the school. Now, if you do want to maintain the intellectual property rights of your videos, please make sure that you are actually using your own time and your own resources to make those videos. And then the school doesn't have any claim on this. Now, it's also important to respect the intellectual property of other people. You cannot, for instance, just like copy a whole movie and put it into one of your videos, right? Otherwise, you're going to get charged with copyright infringement, right? So it's important to make sure that all of the items in your videos actually are copyright free or you have permission to use them, and also that you have done them in your own time if you want to maintain your own intellectual property. Now, before I leave you guys, I'd like to finish with 11 tips that I have for making good videos and finding success in the flipped classroom. Now, the first one is to speak clearly. A lot of times it's really hard to hear teachers if they mumble or if they don't speak clearly or enunciate. So make sure you try and do your best to speak clearly, and one of the first investments you should make is a good microphone if you have the money for it. The second is to have an outline, to actually plan your lesson. Speaking off the cuff is actually really hard, and so you should try not to do it. If you don't have an outline, you'll tend to repeat yourself, and then you'll find that what you have to do is keep re-recording sections, and it gets really frustrating for you, and it's a waste of your time. You should try and keep the overall length of each video to be about 10 to 20 minutes. Most people don't have an attention span that can last for hours and hours, so don't make hour-long videos. It's also difficult for students to keep their attention for that long, and it's also not reasonable. Like if every teacher was making hour-long videos, then students would have to do like 4 hours of homework every single day, which is not really a reasonable thing. So try and keep it 10 to 20 minutes. Occasionally you can go longer, just like with occasionally you can give more homework, right? But keep in mind that students do have other classes, and they're not going to want to watch like hour-long videos. Okay, try not to repeat yourself in your videos. Just say things once, and if you think it's important, you don't repeat it. Just say this is something that's really important. You must know, right? Or you can put even a cue on screen to say very important or something like that. But try not to repeat yourself. Okay, so the next thing is to avoid filler words. This is something I have a tough time with sometimes, even where you use things like right, yeah, things like that. And so try to avoid those words, especially if you do them a lot. Okay, be aware of your items on your desktop or in your background. So if you record your desktop, people will dissect it. So what they'll do is they'll pause the screen and they'll look at every single icon on your desktop. If you show your browser history, they will pause it and look at your whole browser history. If you're recording live, what people will do is they'll pause the screen and they'll look at every single item in the background of your video. So please make sure that if you're going to do that, if you're doing like live videos or if you're showing your desktop, that you don't have anything that you would be embarrassed by on there. I would just generally try not to show those things if you can, just because you never know what people could do with it. Be aware that what you're doing when you're making videos, especially if you're making a whole channel, is that you're making an online persona. Think of it kind of like a resume. Now, the resume does represent you, hopefully, but it's also just the best part of you. Right? So that's the same thing with your online persona. So what you want to do is create this image of yourself that is the best image of yourself that you can create. Keep in mind that people can record your videos and download your videos. So anything you do that might be sort of maybe seen in a bad light can be kept for all time. So, try not to do anything like that. Use YouTube playlists to organize your work. So if you can, if you make a YouTube channel, you can actually set up playlists. And this is what I do. I set up a playlist for every single class. And then in that playlist, I set up the videos as the students should watch them in chronological order. And that way, like after a while, you'll end up with like, hundreds of videos, but it'll be relatively easy to find them because you can just look in the playlists. So another one is don't wear a green shirt. Now, it might seem kind of weird, but if you wear a green shirt, then people can easily use chroma color, which is the green screen technology, and then they can edit out your shirt and then put anything else on there, right? So they can put you into a Hawaiian shirt or a Star Trek shirt or something like that. Recently, the Queen did an address to the public where she was wearing a green dress, and then people used that as an opportunity to put her into like all sorts of different outfits. So it's not the end of the world if you do that, but in general, just don't wear green at all when you're making videos. And on that line, also don't hold up a blank sheet of paper to the screen. If you do that, people will make memes out of you, and what they'll do is they'll Photoshop it and they'll put words on the paper and images to make you look bad or silly, right? So don't ever hold up a blank sheet of paper, and actually just don't hold up paper at all, right? If you can. Otherwise, people, like I said, will generally try and edit that out. In general, no one's going to make you look really bad about it. It's usually done in fun, but yeah, like I just don't do that. Okay, and probably the last thing is to create a budget. So your budget might be zero, or your budget might be like $200 or somewhere in between. It could be thousands. It's easy to sink a lot of money into equipment and stuff like that that you don't need, just because it seems like something that you could use, or there's things that are good deals or stuff like that. So you should be really wary of how you spend your money. Try not to waste your money if you can. But yeah, like you don't want to necessarily blow a whole bunch of money, and it shouldn't cost you a ton of money to do that. You should look online for sales. Like there's always like cheap cameras and stuff like that online. So, take a look for things like that where you can get budget items and, keep the budget down. This is your job, and you don't want to necessarily be investing like a whole paycheck into spending the money. You waste your whole paycheck just to do your job, right? So, don't do that. But those are my 11 pieces of advice for making videos and for flipping the classroom. Remember now, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. And, if you have any other comments, like things that you think I missed, also throw those in the comments too. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.